Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar on Pathway to Electrification and Code. And this webinar will be recorded, and the recording is available for all attendees, or if you missed the webinar, any webinars in the future, just head on over to the Code Adoption Toolkit and all of the recordings are posted there. If there are any issues with audio, please write me in the chat. My name is Erica DeLello, and I'm a project manager for Noresco. This series is sponsored by the Colorado Energy Office with training materials created by Shauna Mozingo and Hope Medina from Shams Coda Associates and Mozingo Code Group. So Hope, Shauna, and I have been working with the Colorado Energy Office to provide trainings just like this one. And on this next slide here, we've got another 2 trainings after this one. And I'll be sending out a follow-up email with a registration link if you'd like to join any of those. And Hope, I know that you've been doing trainings with Excel Energy as well, and to supplement some of the trainings we're doing, Excel also has a series of webinars. So Hope, if you have a link for registration or anything that you'd like to put in the chat, feel free to do so.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. In addition to that, we also offer tailored group trainings or technical assistance for jurisdictions that are updating I-codes. So feel free to reach out to me if you do have any questions about that, or you would like to set up something. We're happy to help the community. And then most of you know, or I hope you know, about the Code Adoption Toolkit and some of the resources available. But today I really wanted to highlight the latest resource, which is the Codes Helpline, which, oops, that's a little cut off up there, but there's a Colorado Codes Helpline, which basically you can submit a question on any of the I-codes. So not only just the IECCT, but if you have a question about the IFC or the IBC, IMC, you know, the list goes on. We're here to help you guys with compliance and understanding the code application. So submit your questions and a subject matter expert will reply within about 2 or 3 days time. And we also help address any reach codes for jurisdictions. So if you have a jurisdiction that's looking at maybe going EV ready or solar ready, you know, and you're looking at how to comply with that, we're happy to help. And so you can access this Helpline through the Code Adoption Toolkit or through the link that I have showing on the screen right now. And then just a couple of housekeeping items is that we do want to encourage questions. So please use that Q&A function and I'll let our presenters know at the end of the presentation. There's also the ability to raise your hand and ask a question directly, and I can move forward with unmuting you. And then lastly, there's a survey window that pops up automatically once you exit the webinar. If you could please take a minute to provide feedback, so we can continue to improve on these webinars, or if there's a topic that you want us to present on, that's the place to do it. So with that, I want to introduce our presenters today. We have Hope Medina, who is an energy and sustainability consultant for Shams Coda Associates. Hope's worked on a national level to develop, implement, and assist with adopting energy codes and green codes. And she's also on the ICC Sustainability Membership Council, a consensus committee member, and a task group chair of the National Green Building Standard. And then we also have here Shauna Mozingo, and she's the president of Mozingo Code Group, and as well as being a plans analyst and inspector for jurisdictions. So over the past 10 years or so, she's provided code adoption and assistance and trainings to building officials, builders, energy raters, designers, and she's been past president of the ICC Colorado chapter, has served on the IECC code development and correlation committees, and is very involved. So we've got some really great presenters today. Bring your questions. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Shauna and Hope.
Excellent, thank you. Let me see here. Which is the best screen? Maybe this one.
Whichever
Right.
screen has the slides, I think is the best one.
All right, well, hopefully you can see that and that my dog won't get too crazy with whatever. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
With the slide presentation? Perfect. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to talk to you today about this journey beyond the minimum. Right now it's beyond the minimum, but it won't be for very long. So let's just go ahead and get started. Hope, you want to lead us off?
Sure. So, especially right now with what has recently passed with the new energy code statute, we know that the state has some goals and that we have a journey ahead of us. Now, prior to the state coming up with this, we had so many communities that were sharing some of these same goals and same journeys. And some of the things that people were really looking towards was being able to reduce their carbon footprint and to improve on their energy efficiency, whether that's going beyond what the code is or just being better at getting energy compliance. There was an awful lot of discussions about being more sustainable, and the sustainability aspect of the codes was really starting to generate a focus within a lot of the communities here in Colorado. And then, of course, we always want to be resilient, to withstand when and if we ever, have some sort of natural disaster, making sure that our buildings are able to withstand that. And then really, we have a lot of goals ahead of us, and really thinking about how do we do it so that we future-proof ourselves, making sure that we're doing the steps and preparing our communities to actually be able to attain these goals. Shauna? And then, of course, yes, electrification is really not just for REACH codes. Electrification does not mean that you have to have, an R400 in the walls. It's a great tool when you utilize it correctly.
Right, and I would just say that, a lot of times people used to think of EV and PV and electrification as this above code, stretch code, green code thing. And we just need to really realize that, especially with where the 2024 code is going and where the state laws have taken us, that electrification isn't REACH codes anymore. It will be base minimum code, and it already is for many jurisdictions. We'll see here in future slides. So as you go through today's presentation, I would just encourage you to think of this as being the new minimum here shortly, because it is going to be.
Exactly. So it would be great if you guys could put in the chat about prior to July 1st of next year, does your community have plans for electrification, or has it already been working towards some sort of electrification?
And I would just say, if you put it in the chat, just kind of let us know what jurisdiction you are so that we,
Oh, yes.
or
absolutely.
what community you're from. If you could just type in the chat, are you going to wait for the state to make you go there, or are you already going there?
Exactly. This is where, you kind of have a little bit of control and making sure that you're doing it in a responsible fashion. We know electrification is one of those, what do we want to call that, Shauna? A fad word, that everybody wants to do it.
Yeah.
But, have you been thinking about what the steps that need to be taken to be able to get there responsibly? So it looks like we have a few communities that are working on it, already have it. We've got Longmont, Aspen, Avon, So we have some a little bit here in the, northern Denver metro area, some up in the mountains. So thank you for those who participated and put that in there. So when we're talking about electrification currently within the 21 or previously, there really isn't anything specific in the code that states here's electrification or electric ready. There's nothing really listed in there. And there are some things that you need to keep in mind when you're talking about electrification. Being prepared on the residential side of things is a really good step forward, because typically people don't usually completely redo or remodel their whole home, on a more consistent basis. Whereas commercially, we have a lot of buildings out there that have, tenant finishes. They come in, they have a lease for 2 years. So they're there for 2 years and then they leave and somebody else comes in. So commercial has a lot more, I guess, fluidity to its occupants for it. So that's something that you need to really keep in mind. And existing is going to be probably one of those areas that is going to be more difficult to figure out how you're going to deal with it, as opposed to if it is new. Now, there really is an understanding that by doing all the prep work and thoughts now really is going to be able to take you into the future where you're not having to deal with some of the situations that can arise when you have existing buildings.
I think that SWEEP has a really good website, SWEEP Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, and some of the tools are also on the toolkit that Erica shared, that really get down into that cost of retrofit of electrification versus doing it under new construction, and the amazing difference in those costs. So it's so much cheaper to do at new construction than it is to retrofit. So we're not going to go into all of those costs and everything today, but I would encourage you to check out those, or our emails will be on here. Send us an email at the end and I'll be happy to send you all of those documents on the difference in cost. Not just cost, this is also time at plan review. If you're reviewing for it at plan review, it's so much easier to look at in the beginning than when somebody comes in and tries to retrofit and you're trying to piece the puzzle together. So I would just encourage you to check that out.
Agreed. So when we talk about electrification, there's really 3 options that are probably the more predominant terms that are being utilized. You have electric ready, you have electric preferred, and then you have electric with some exceptions. And some of these exceptions, we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Excuse me. So electric ready. Electric ready is one of those, it is the least, this is the minimum electrification, basically, that you are able to do. You have some items such as you're going to have wiring and a receptacle that's installed in locations where you have a fuel fired appliance, so that when that appliance or that equipment is replaced, the thought concept is at that point it's kind of a plug and play, so to speak, that the equipment could just easily fit in there without having to do any retrofits. You aren't removing drywall and running wire and doing those items that can be extremely costly. And so because of that, this is like I said, the simplest and easiest thing that you can do. Would you mind going to the next slide, Shauna?
Well, it shows the picture because you have, you also generally those requirements for electric ready, make you save the panel space as well.
Yes.
For it. And I guess one other thing that I would mention, sometimes when you're doing electric ready, to put some thought into what that electric equipment might be, because there might be some equipment that's going to require more space. Like say I went from a gas water heater to like a heat pump water heater, I might need a little bit more space too. So it's not just about the wiring, but am I saving enough space so that I don't have to remodel the house just to switch out a water heater? Or depending on the kind of things you require. I have a couple jurisdictions that want to go to specifically requiring heat pumps, water heaters. And if that's the case, you need to think about the space, not just the outlets.
Exactly. And going a little bit beyond the IECC in that aspect, you know, when we're talking about space and looking for that, you know, that information on the plans, you know, it's not necessarily just the space for the equipment. It's also that work area space that's required. So things like that, you know, you kind of have to think about, right?
Right.
So now we have electric preferred. Now, electric preferred is, excuse me. Excuse me, electric preferred is where the intent or the thought is that you're going to highly incentivize having all electric equipment and appliances. So you give them kind of options, and some of the options is you either go all electric with your appliances and your equipment, or you can do something where you're doing electric ready. And then if you are installing a you know, gas-fired appliance, that you are putting in a higher efficiency of that gas equipment. And the other option that we're kind of seeing too is to require the electric ready, where you're putting in the wire and the plug and having the space for it. And then you're asking for either additional provisions out of the IECC, such as, you know, having 2 additional efficiency packages if you happen to be under the 2018, or if you're on the 2021 version, you are requiring that you have to obtain additional points from the various tables there. So there are a few options as far as electric preferred, but as you can see, going the route of installing all electric equipment and appliances really does I guess get you out of, for lack of a better word, some of the additional items. But part of this is, you know, the reason why some of these other options are in there is because electric appliances is not a one-size-fits-all option. There are times, such as at a hospital, there is equipment that cannot be utilized, you know, as full electric. And so, and I've seen a hospital right now that's trying to do this. And so what they are doing is they have, you know, the areas that they're electric ready, but they're putting really, really efficient fuel fired equipment into these projects, because sometimes you just cannot utilize that electric equipment.
Right. And I guess a couple of things to keep in mind too is, you know, electric preferred is like, we prefer you to go all electric, but we understand that, you know, gas is still an option. And if you go gas, here are some things you have to do. And so it's really incentivizing electric by making it more cumbersome to go gas. But when you do that, you have to be really careful. I've talked to the Department of Energy at great lengths about this, because some jurisdictions are saying, okay, you go all electric, but if you're going to do gas, it has to be high efficiency, which is technically against the law unless you make it an option. So that's why we say, okay, you either do all electric or you go high efficient gas or you go the minimum efficiency gas plus some options in the IECC. So you have to give the option for that that minimum as far as NACA standards. You can make them do some other things, but there always has to be that option, unless it's part of your green program or something. If it's going to be your base code, you have to give the option for the minimum efficiency, but you can do it like you can do minimum efficiency, but you also have to do an extra C406 or R40, whatever it is, 8, I think,
408, yeah.
option, an R408 option. So just keeping in mind that there are some requirements. There are NACA laws that say here's the minimum efficiencies for appliances, and you're not allowed to require more than that unless it's an option. And so there are definitely ways to do that.
Yeah, and this particular community, and actually several communities that Shauna and I have worked with, what they did is they made sure that they had a code section to kind of back up what they were asking for. So the higher efficiency requirement came from the additional efficiency package saying this is now the package that you will utilize for it.
Right.
So that is something that Shauna and I have worked with these communities and making sure that we're all compliant with all the various laws.
Right. I mean, I still see every once in a while I'll help somebody with their amendments. I just did this last week, and they just off the top require a 96%er, and I'm like, well, you can't just do that. But when I talk to DOE, they say, really, people still do it because the people going after these efficiency things are going after the big picture. They're not going after little jurisdictions. So that's why jurisdictions are getting away with it. It may not be legal, but they're getting away with it because they're not going after them. They're going after the big fish. So that's why you still see it here and there. All right, electric only.
Electric only. I think it kind of speaks for itself. But basically what you're doing is you are only installing those electric appliances or equipment, and there's really no fossil fuels that are permitted or installed in these locations. So that when we talk about electric only, this is what they're referring to. Excuse me. But there are locations, and there are locations inside Colorado, and there's locations outside of Colorado that have already established their electrification only options, but they do have some exceptions going on. They have exceptions for like gas stoves and gas fireplaces when you're talking, especially on, I would say, on the residential side of things. They're requiring that your heating equipment, your cooling equipment, however you're going to heat your water, those items would be required to be electric. And then, there are some options. Now, I know, like I've talked to a colleague of mine in DC, and he's like, if we were to redo it, there's a few things that I would change, and I would allow some exceptions. I would allow more exceptions than what we did because we didn't understand the whole, concept, and some things that came to fruition through, just trial and error. And then, then there are some things when, you start talking about, full electrification in restaurants and trying to be sustainable. And the electric equipment for, like, we'll just say pizza ovens, you have to go outside of the United States to get it. So then if you like start looking at things, you have to get it from over in Europe, bring it here. And it becomes one of those, when you're talking about wanting to be sustainable and, working towards your goals, is making everything electric working toward your goals? Or, are there some ways that obviously, hit the big items and allow for some other items to, be, the fuel fired, but really high efficient?
I think that it's, there's a difference in sometimes how jurisdictions write their amendments and adopt their codes. And some people just, you know, we know we need to include electrification, so we're going to write some things up, and they get it in there and realize, oh my goodness, we spend the majority of our time doing this case by case. Oh, we just can't make this work. It's not feasible. And other jurisdictions who are taking their time and really looking at what are the costs, how much, or what is the availability of these appliances, especially for commercial. How are my residents going to do without a gas fireplace? Are they going to be okay with electric? You know, like they put so much thought into it that it maybe takes them an extra code cycle to write it up, but then they don't have as much case by case where they have to work it all out. I see it both ways. It probably 50-50 on how jurisdictions are doing it. They write it up and then work it out as they go, and the others work it out and then write it up. It just depends on, really, I think it depends on the pressure you're getting from council to move forward.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, there's lots of communities that are thinking about it, and they're thinking about it in a real logical way.
Yeah.
So
I think that I was just gonna say, out of all of the jurisdictions that I'm helping, probably 80% of them want something, they just don't know what.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the illusion or mystery of you know, electrification, is because, you know, the council may really want this. They know that this is the way to do it, and you know what they need to do, because that's the quote unquote advertisement out there type deal. You know, everybody knows that word now. And then, you know, the code officials are trying to figure out, okay, so this is what my council wants, and how do I get us there?
Right.
In a fashion that's, you know, good, and not just one of those that looks great on paper, but will never be able to implement anything. So there are steps, as Sean and I were talking about, you know, the planning that's involved. You know, you want to set yourself up and set your community up really to succeed. And to do that, I personally feel that there are some steps that need to be taken to support your efforts when you're looking at electrification. And so the nice thing is, there are some items within the IECC itself that, while it doesn't have specific requirements or specific provisions in there for electrification, there's actually a lot of things in there that really supports the concept of electrification. So you have to have a plan established, you know, when you start talking about, you know, your goals for electrification. And one thing is, you need to talk. And you need to talk to, you know, quite a few entities that are within your community yourself. You know, as a code official, you're probably talking to your sustainability coordinator and, you know, council and utilities, you know. So there's a few people within the community that you're looking at. And then you also have to talk to your utility provider. If you were to go from, you know, full electrification next month, can your utility provider be able to provide that power that you're needed? You know, is it plausible that they're going to be able to supply that? Now, there may be, you know, utilities that would be able to supply that, but is it that they're going to have to be buying it and collecting it from all the other states, that you go from 3 cents a kilowatt to 13 cents a kilowatt? And that's a realistic concept to understand. There's a community, I won't say who, you know, years ago, in a different state actually, so we're okay there. Their city council wanted to go with full electrification. And so within a year, because they have such high turnover, they were able to basically get their entire town having full electrification, and it was great. The only problem is again, they went from 3 cents a kilowatt to that 13 cents a kilowatt. And, so that's something to be mindful of.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important to have that conversation with the utilities. They should be in on electrification conversation from beginning, because many times people write it and then find out that it can't be done. And if you talk to the utilities, most of those utilities provide gas and electric, so they're not going to want to get rid of full gas, and they're not going to have the ability to do full electric. So a lot of utilities that I've talked to in many different jurisdictions are asking that you make it an option at first for a little while, to say, maybe electric preferred or something, and make it an option to begin with, but to go all electric right away, especially on larger jurisdictions where you're going to have commercial and residential all electric, that's going to be a big shock to the system. And so many of them are asking that you don't do that. So make sure that you are really, really inviting them to play in the conversation.
Yeah, because they're planning too, they have to, they have to work on their infrastructure, just like, a building department has to change their infrastructure a little bit. You're going to do a different type of plan review. You're now adding this in. The same for the utilities. They have to get their infrastructure in place to be able, they don't want to, charge you the 13 cents. They want to charge you the 3 cents. So. The other thing is you have to think about how are you going to support the electrification. And one of those ways of being able to do that is you have to look at solar, right? And there are some different options when you talk about solar, how you want to include that. Is it, where you are full blown, you have to have so many kilowatts type of deal, or are you looking at a planning stage?
Well, and also, like, if you're doing the solar, is it solar ready? Depending on your electrification level, right? And is it solar ready? Is it solar? How much solar? What are those requirements? And now what do I do about battery? Do I have battery storage that I'm going to incorporate? It's not just so, a lot of people think, oh, just write something up, but there's a lot to think about.
There's a lot to think about in that. And then you brought up a really good point too, solar ready. And then there are things like, are you going to allow them to utilize RECs or, a community solar project? So, there's a lot that is involved with it. And like you said, battery storage right now is one of those hot topics that are being discussed, at least on the commercial side of the 2024.
Well, it totally has to be figured out, right? We want to say we are resilient and sustainable. Well, if the grid goes down and what is my option? My resiliency plan has to include battery storage, right? And so what is that? So those are definitely concerns. I just met with the Marshall Fire victims a week or so ago, and that was one of their questions. Like, okay, we know we're going to build back and we're going to put solar and we're going to do this, but what about battery storage? Like, we've got to figure this out. What are our options and what does the code require and what, and so that's, the owners are thinking about this. So you have to be thinking about it in your design and in your codification of these requirements, for sure. It's all part of this plan we got to work out.
Yeah, and I think the plan has to include, like we said at the very beginning of this slide, there's a lot of communication that needs to happen. And, your plan, I think, will evolve after when you speak to the utilities or you speak to your planning department, because they say, hey, you know what, we can't fit that on here. It doesn't meet our zoning ordinance, or there's going to be, this ever evolving plan, but you have to have a plan.
Right. Gotta be a plan. I mean, I think a lot of times people will adopt this. I guess this is a transition you have to think about if you are a jurisdiction. A lot of times you think, okay, so much went into writing this code and so many people fought it out. We don't need to add all of these amendments. But when some of this stuff, when you get into this stuff that's not, there's support for it in the code, but it's not in the code, and you want to write it because the code hasn't caught up with, the demand, then it does take more planning. You can't just write something and throw it in the code. You're going to spend the next 3 years or however long till you adopt a new one fighting with yourself, trying to figure out how to make it work. And so we're learning that it's more planning. It's more planning, but it'll be beneficial if you do it.
And all of this is really built to make your community to be successful. I mean, that's ultimately what we want. We're not trying to be, Debbie Downer on electrification. We're just trying to make you think about what are the things that we need to do so that we can be a success. And then we can take our success and share it with others, right? Because we always love that, hey, we know that this community's done this, it's working well for them. What did they do? Right.
There's so many people doing it right now that why reinvent the wheel? Look at what they've done, their lessons learned, how they overcame things, how they had to change things. There's so many people doing it right now.
Exactly. So what does the IECC have to support you and to be able to support these community goals? And the first one you have is the solar ready appendices. There's one on the residential provisions, there's one on the commercial provisions, and it's been in the code for 3 cycles now, I think it is. So it's had its opportunity to really be vetted, get it implemented, see what's working, see what's not working, and where we need to adjust things. So the residential provisions, as you can see, talks about, things like your 600 square foot roof, your roof has to be at least 600 square feet, and maybe I'll try to figure out how to do that. But as plans examiners and architects and designers and builders, you have to be fully aware that, the plans have to have listed on there where your solar ready zones are going to be. And if you are a single family or a 2-family, you have to designate 300 square feet. If you're a townhouse, then you're looking at, 1,500 square
150.
Feet. Oh, what did I say? 1,500? Yeah.
Woo!
Sorry, we're only doing 150. But there's things that, you have to have on there, and it has to become really wide known. And part of that is, the obstructions. There can't be any obstructions in that solar ready zone. We have to make sure that, the loads have been accounted for with the roof itself to be able to add that solar on there. And there has to be space located in the electrical panel itself. Now, there are some places that are saying, conduit and some other information on there. But the other thing is you have to have this permanent certificate that you have, kind of similar to, if we all remember when the certificate was required in the electrical panel that was there to provide all the information. You knew what the glazing was, you knew what the wall insulation was, and roof and your mechanical equipment, all that. You had that information. You could just open up the panel and it's right there. So now what they're including is that same type of concept, and with it, it's going to show, where that solar ready zone is, and any type of information that would be pertinent to it. They're not requiring it only at the electrical panel. You could put it by water heater or a place that's going to be conspicuous, which is nice because we like options.
I see a lot of jurisdictions right now adopting this solar ready appendix because it's not necessarily it's not necessarily a costly thing. It's really a design thing. Have you designed it so that if somebody wants to add solar, there's a space for it. If they want to add solar, the load is designed for it and the panel is saved for it. Some, like you say, some jurisdictions go further and say run the conduit. But that's usually an amendment that people are making. So it's really just trying to make it easier so that if I come in and I buy a house and I say I want to have solar on there, I don't have to hire an engineer to go back and recalculate the load to make sure that it'll hold it or anything. It's there. And there are, of course, exceptions. You see these requirements on here, and there are exceptions out, but there's really no reason not to adopt the solar ready appendix because it's like people say, oh, that's just going to add more cost. Really? No, because this is just a design phase, design for it. There's nothing really that says do anything. So.
And this is really one of those future proofing your community. You're wanting to have electrification, you're wanting to do that. Having this requirement is really important. Now, the reason why some of that stuff is on there, because we have to realize our roof is like really hot property. You know, it houses so many things. Like it houses the vents that go through, whether it's, you know, plumbing or mechanical. We've got pipes that go through. We got skylights that are up there. We also have like solar panels. Oh yeah, solar panels. We were talking about that, you know, that are located up there. So we have to keep in mind, we have to have it designated. This is where we're going. And we have to also talk to our building community because, you know, there are things that really have to be paid attention to, like your exhaust fans. You have to make sure if you're using exhaust only for your whole house mechanical ventilation and it says you need 90, and so you have that 6-inch pipe, but it says you only get 90 if you go straight up. You can't do any, you know, 90s or 45s on there. Now you have to start thinking about, oh, okay, so it does affect more than just, you know, slapping on some solar panels up on the roof.
Exactly. All right. So then you also have the same solar ready appendix in the commercial to future proof your commercial buildings, I guess. I would say future.
Yeah, and they're very similar. I think probably really the only big difference is the amount of area that's required for your solar ready zones. And whereas on the residential side, you just had to include some sort of load, the commercial side is specific in that you're going to add an additional 5 loads or 5 pounds to your dead load for that.
I think most residential building loads are, especially in Colorado, set pretty high. There's enough buffer factor in there that they really will hold the solar, but they're going to be extra cautious on the commercial building.
Yeah. So because we're talking about residential commercial, just wanted to bring up really quick, you know, as far as the energy code is concerned, you know, a residential building includes the 1 and 2 family and townhouses, but it also includes the group, you know, R2, R3s, and R4s that are 3 stories or less above grade plane. And then the commercial is considered anything else. So when we talk about, you know, residential provisions as opposed to commercial provisions, that's where that's where it really comes into play.
Right. Just remembering, like, you have a 3-story apartment building, that's where the RB solar ready provisions are going to kick in. And if you have a 4-story apartment building, then you're, you know, C, your commercial ones. So that seems to be one of the places where jurisdictions get messed up the most, is on those apartment buildings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we can skip through that. We just went.
There you go.
So another thing that really supports, you know, your goals for this is, you know, we mentioned in the electrification or the electric preferred was the fact that there was the mechanical efficiency that was somewhat of an increase. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Shauna. So these are some of the options that at least I've been seeing. I don't know about you, Shauna, as far as adoptions where they're requiring either the higher efficiency and you know, putting it back onto 406.2, or they're asking for multiple packages if you're on the 2018, or that you have an increase of the required points if you're on the 2021. And I've seen a few different numbers for the increase in points.
Right. Yeah, totally. It's all over the board, depending on, you know, if I want to be better than my neighbor.
Yeah. I think there is a little bit of a competition going on right now concerning that. Good, bad, or ugly. I think, you know, competition can be very healthy and, you know, and helpful, but yeah, so.
Right. It's just saying, you know, the most popular is to say you can go all electric, or you can go electric plus have some high efficient gas, or have the low efficient gas and 2 additional efficiency package options. I mean, like that, those are pretty standard of what I'm seeing everywhere.
Yeah. And, you know, we've talked a lot about the commercial additional efficiency package options, but the same is translating onto the residential side of things.
Right. The 2021, at least, the 2021 brings in those additional efficiency package options that wasn't in previous versions for residential. So that's what we're talking about. If you're on the 18, you might consider, if you're doing electrification, you might consider bringing the 2021 additional efficiency package options into your 18 adoption so that you have that to choose from.
Agreed. The next thing is, you know, stretch code concepts. A lot of times, or what I'm finding right now is while, you know, Shauna alluded to, and we've kind of talked about the fact that, you know, electrification isn't necessarily a stretch code, especially with the new statute that we're in the process of, you know, having fun with. It is somewhat of, you know, there are some stretch code concepts that does support, you know, the concept of electrification. Now, one of the things that is, I think, extremely important is making sure if you're going to have electrification, you know, you have to have a robust thermal envelope. And that doesn't necessarily mean, like I said, putting, you know, an R60 in the wall. What it means is it could be how it's installed. Are we making sure that we're getting the compliance that we need? But one of the areas that is really, I guess, doable without necessarily having to change designs is lowering that Fenestration U Factor. It's kind of a somewhat easy one, and it's not necessarily a huge expense to do. I mean, if you're on the commercial side and you're required to have a 0.40 and you go with a 0.25, that's probably going to be a little bit more expensive than if you had a 0.40 and you went to a 0.38, you know.
I think that it's really important to, when we've had to have these conversations with utilities and with city councils, is to remember that people say, well, if I go all electric, oh my gosh, you know, that load and that, you know, well, if I make a very good thermal envelope, I'm going to be using less load, right? So the two go hand in hand. And so it's it's important to make sure that people understand that, yeah, I'm not going to this high load. If I went to this high load under the buildings we have right now, yes, but if I make my building envelope better, the load is smaller also. It doesn't take as much to heat or cool the building. And so I don't have as high of a load. And so that factors into all of it as well.
Exactly. You can have that lower first cost with buying the equipment, and then the second cost where, you know, the continual deal. And then, you know, when we're talking about some of the strengthening for commercial. We have to remember that we have tenant finishes, and they really are a horse of a different color, right? Because they're not starting from the beginning. They're stuck with whatever is there. I would probably say a lot of times I see tenant finishes where they're improving upon what it is, but technically they don't necessarily have to. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then, one of the things that, is helpful and things to look at is, looking at the mechanical side of things. Are there mechanical components that would be a benefit in trying to strengthen your efficiency, so that when you do electrification, it's an easy step. So the other thing is, when you start talking about, you want to maybe do some stretch codes, is look at the proposals that are in the 2024, maybe look, because people think of stretch codes and, quite often they think of, oh, I have to be better than the minimum of what's in the IECC, but they're starting to include things that are, considered for like sustainability. And so that might be thinking about the fact of, you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint. Maybe construction and site waste is recycled instead of it all going into the landfill type of deal. Maybe if you're on the 18, you require that the only option is you're going to do that thermal envelope testing. And then remember that you can always borrow from your neighbors. We've talked about that a little bit. If a location is doing really well with their stuff,
Yeah, totally.
There is no higher form of flattery than,
right.
something like that.
Yeah. No worries.
So,
and then also that net zero appendix that's new to the 2021 is that a lot of jurisdictions are looking at that appendix. That there's one for commercial and residential. The commercial is kind of like that ZEPI, kind of like a ZEPI thing, and then the residential is an ERI score, but it's a pathway to zero that a lot of people are wanting, and so there is an optional path in the 2021s. I see a lot of people moving to the 2024 to see what has changed there and bringing that 2024 language in for their net zero paths as well.
yeah,
Is that what you're
net
seeing?
zero is probably one of those two that is pretty similar to electrification. You want to have a plan in place. It's very difficult to go from this to that without, if you've never done, energy compliance and, your council says go to net zero, and then you're expecting your building community to, be able to comply with that appendix, that's setting yourself up to fail. And I'm really big on let's be successful.
That's right. I agree 100%. Let's be successful. This is just looking at, what some other jurisdictions and I think that this is changing daily. What some other jurisdictions are doing, a lot of jurisdictions that are just strengthening their amendments, making the IECC basic package a little stronger, either requiring a couple of different paths or lowering the U factors or whatever. I have some jurisdictions that are lowering the window to wall area in residential that's never been in there. Like there's different strengthening amendments. And then there are people that are actually adding solar ready provisions or electrification ready or EV, or like there's things that people are adding, people that are in the progress of adding things. So, or people that are doing all of it. And we're going to strengthen the code, we're going to add solar, we're going to add electrification. There are people that are doing all of it right now or talking about it. And so this goes back to that, don't recreate the wheel. Let's look and see what other people are doing, and let's talk to them about how long did it take you? How is it working? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? We have, and like I said, this slide could totally be out of date by today, because people are changing all the time. but the next couple slides, we're not gonna like spend a ton of time on, but we kind of took the time to show you, here's what some of the jurisdictions wrote. I don't know if this is, I don't know who this is, Louisville or Superior, somebody. Anyway, how they're doing their electrification in their code by saying, okay, if you're gonna do your fuel-fired equipment, you know, it has to meet one of those high efficiency options. And then of course, giving you exceptions out for like your commercial kitchen equipment or things like that. There's a few jurisdictions, and a lot of these jurisdictions post their amendments online, so you can kind of go through and see. You'll get a copy of this handout, so when you get it and you get to that slide that we showed a minute ago about who's doing what, right here, I think, you can kind of go to their website and see how did they do it, what are they doing, and see the different types of language of how they're doing it. They have electric infrastructure. You got to go all electric or electric ready, you know, run the conduit, do the junction box. And then you can do fuel fired equipment, but you're going to have to go through some extra steps to do it. A lot of different ways to do it.
And one of the things that I forgot to mention earlier, as far as the electrical panel is, you know, keeping in mind, you got to be able to size that panel too. So, you know, some jurisdictions in their amendments are actually saying, you know, you either have to size it for future electric equipment, or you have to have, this is the minimum size panel that must be installed.
I think a lot of jurisdictions putting a minimum size panel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just different wording. A lot of you might have heard that Crested Butte went all electric. That's the most recent, but really there. And so there's this is just a little summary of what they did. You know, all new commercial and residential's all electric, except for commercial cooking. So they have some different things in there. Net zero ready homes that require third-party verification. Level 3 alterations required the areas to be electric ready. And so everybody's doing something different. I know Basalt just submitted their new stuff, and there's a lot of requirements in there, but really it seems like you could buy your way out of any of it. You pay a fee if you don't meet the requirements. I don't know. So I got to do some more research into what Basalt just did, because it feels like you could just buy your way out of it. But
yeah, and I mean, as you see, there has been exceptions, you know, through all the various communities, and that's because we know that we've been in this industry long enough to know that nothing works across the board in every situation. You know, take new versus existing. If it's brand new, you can incorporate all this. What do you do with 100-year-old house? I live in a 100-year-old house. There's a lot of things that I am just not capable of doing because my house can't support it. You know, so you have to have options in, you know, how you're going to approach this. And like I said, you know, planning is just so important in really being successful.
Right. And I mean, that talking to the utilities, to me, really key. I have jurisdictions that have more than one utility that serves their jurisdiction. One might do gas and one might do electric, or part of it might be the city's electric and the other part might be somebody else's electric. And so it just depends on how it's broken up. So, I mean, what might work for one utility might not work for the other utility. And so it is, so I can't even stress how important it is to get those utilities involved in planning for success of this electrification. And I think, I mean, that is what we have, but we would love to hear if there are some questions for us, Erica.
Thanks so much, Hope and Shauna. This was a great presentation. I'm seeing one question. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Got a question in the chat here. And it's specifically talking about reference to a table in the 2021 IRC. If you guys want to take a look at the question in the chat here, it's pretty specific. The climate
Climate zone
zones.
5. Mhm.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, states for climate zone 5 and marine 4, the wood frame wall, our value is, okay, first of all, I'm gonna say that be sure to download your errata. Go to Errata Central, ERRATA Central. ICC, when they published the book, there were a lot of errors. And so I know some of them are for this table and some of them are for this specific table, this section that you're referring to in this question. There were a lot of errata that because they didn't do it right. So every jurisdiction or every climate zone, almost except for climate zone 1 and 2, will have an option for cavity only, continuous only, and cavity plus continuous for a 2x6 and for a 2x4 walls. So there are a lot of options in there. What you're posting right here in this question for the 20+5 or the 13+10, there are a lot more options than that. It's just in the errata. So make sure you see that. But what does this say? So table, the R value is only 20+5 or 13+10. It seems that the IEC residential only has an R value for continuous insulation in wood frame walls. Is there a flat insulation requirement in the residential IECC, or do they assume a continuous application? No, there, like I said, download the errata. You will all, starting in 2021, you will always have a cavity only option. So it might be R30. And then you have a cavity plus continuous. So you're 20+5 or 13+10. And then you will have a continuous only option, which I think is 20. I don't have the book open.
Yeah, continue. It's R20.
R20 continuous. So you will have an option for any way you want. Make sure you download the errata. And then, so that's if you go prescriptively. So if you don't want to do any of those options, the 30, 20+5, 13+10, or R20, then just switch and do res check or performance or ERI. Just do a different path. That's, you only have to do those if you go prescriptive.
And remember too that your thermal envelope also correlates with your vapor retarder options. So you could be installing something that will be both for your thermal envelope and
right,
complete you for what's required for your vapor retarder. But you can also be creating an issue too.
Yes.
So don't forget to look at that section.
Right, definitely. Yeah, so I don't know if I have the, no, I don't have the opportunity to post the link to Errata Central, but I just pulled it up today for an earlier webinar I was teaching for Nevada, and I noticed that there's a lot of errata for this. What I do is I download the errata, I scribble the answers, I scribble the changes in my code book, and then I print the errata too and keep them in the back of my code book so that I see all the reasonings and all of the stuff. But there are a bunch of errata for every edition of the code. They print it, and as we start using it, we find the mistakes. So always look for that.
Great. Thank you for the tip. And I think that wraps up our presentation for today. So if there are any follow-up questions, Shauna and Hope have their contact info on the screen now. And if you would like to inquire about technical assistance or further training, feel free to reach out to me as well. But otherwise, everyone have a great rest of your day. And thank you again to our presenters.
Thank you.